furs as he possibly could, was beating the hillsides all day long on horseback in search of deer. His efforts were not rewarded by even so much as one fallow deer killed every day, and he was an excellent hunter. 2 years later I was travelling up the Amur, and by the end of October reached the lower end of that picturesque gorge which the Amur pierces in the Dus Allin (Little Kingan) before it enters the lowlands where it joins the Sungari. I found the Cossacks in the villages of that gorge in the greatest excitement, because thousands and thousands of fallow deer were crossing the Amur where it is narrowest in order to reach the lowlands. For several days in succession, upon a length of some 40 miles of the river, the Cossacks were butchering the deer as they crossed the Amur, in which already floated a good deal of ice. Thousands were killed every day, and the exodus nevertheless continued. Like migrations were never seen either before or since, and this one must have been called for by an early and heavy snowfall in the Great Kingan, which compelled the deer to make a desperate attempt at reaching the lowlands in the east of the Dus Mountains. Indeed, a few days later, the Dus Allin was also buried up under snow 2 or 3 feet deep. Now when one imagines the immense territory, almost as big as Great Britain, from which the scattered groups of deer must have gathered for a migration which was undertaken under the pressure of exceptional circumstances, and realizes the difficulties which had to be overcome before all the deer came to the common idea of crossing the Amur further south, where it is narrowest, one cannot but deeply admire the amount of sociability displayed by these intelligent animals. If we remember that the buffaloes of North America displayed the same powers of combination, one saw them grazing in great numbers in the plains, but these numbers were made up by an infinity of small groups which never mixed together, and yet when necessity arose, all groups, however scattered over an immense territory, came together and made up those immense columns, numbering hundreds of thousands of individuals, which I mentioned on a preceding page. I also ought to say a few words at least about the compound families of the elephants, their mutual attachment, their deliberate ways in posting sentries, and the feelings of sympathy developed by such a life of close mutual support. According to Samuel W. Baker, elephants combine in larger groups than the compound family. I have frequently observed, he wrote, in the portion of Ceylon known as the Park Country, the tracks of elephants in great numbers, which have evidently been considerable herds that have joined together in a general retreat from a ground which they considered insecure. Wild Beasts and Their Ways, Volume 1st, page 102. I might mention the sociable feelings of those disreputable creatures, the wild boars, and find a word of praise for their powers of association in the case of an attack by a beast of prey. Pigs attacked by wolves do the same. Hudson, L.C. The hippopotamus and the rhinoceros too would occupy a place in a work devoted to animal sociability. Several striking pages might be given to the sociability and mutual attachment of the seals and the walruses, and finally one might mention the most excellent feelings existing among the sociable cetaceans. But I have to say yet a few words about the societies of monkeys, which acquire an additional interest from their being the link which will bring us to the societies of primitive man. It is hardly needful to say that those mammals, which stand at the very top of the animal world and most approach man by their structure and intelligence, are eminently sociable. Evidently we must be prepared to meet with all varieties of character and habits in so great a division of the animal kingdom, which includes hundreds of species. But all things considered, it must be said that sociability, action in common, mutual protection, and a high development of those feelings which are the necessary outcome of social life are characteristic of most monkeys and apes. From the smallest species to the biggest ones, sociability is a rule to which we know but a few exceptions. The nocturnal apes prefer isolated life. The capuchins (Cebus capucinus), the monos and the howling monkeys live but in small families, and the orang-utans have never been seen by A. or Wallace otherwise than either solitary or in very small groups of 3 or 4 individuals, while the gorillas seem never to join in bands. But all the remainder of the monkey tribe, the chimpanzees, the sajus, the sakis, the mandrills, the baboons, and so on, are sociable in the highest degree. They live in great bands and even join with other species than their own, most of them become quite unhappy when solitary. The cries of distress of each one of the band immediately bring together the whole of the band, and they boldly repulse the attacks of most carnivores and birds of prey. Even eagles do not dare attack them. They plunder our fields always in bands, the old ones taking care for the safety of the commonwealth. The little titties, whose childish sweet faces so much struck Humboldt, embrace and protect one another when it rains, rolling their tails over the necks of their shivering comrades. Several species display the greatest solicitude for their wounded, and do not abandon a wounded comrade during a retreat till they have ascertained that it is dead and that they are helpless to restore it to life. Thus James Forbes narrated in his Oriental Memoirs a fact of such resistance in reclaiming from his hunting party the dead body of a female monkey, that one fully understands why the witnesses of this extraordinary scene resolved never again to fire at one of the monkey race. Romanes Animal Intelligence, page 472. In some species, several individuals will combine to overturn a stone in order to search for ants' eggs under it. The hamadryas not only post sentries, but have been seen making a chain for the transmission of the spoil to a safe place, and their courage is well known. Brehm's description of a regular fight which his caravan had to sustain before the hamadryas would let it resume its journey in the valley of the Mensa in Abyssinia has become classical. Brehm, First 82, Darwin's Descent of Man, Chapter 3rd, the Kozlov expedition of 1899–1901 have also had to sustain in northern Tibet a similar fight. The playfulness of the tailed apes and the mutual attachment which reigns in the families of chimpanzees also are familiar to the general reader, and if we find among the highest apes two species, the orangutan and the gorilla, which are not sociable, we must remember that both, limited as they are to very small areas, the one in the heart of Africa and the other in the two islands of Borneo and Sumatra, have all the appearance of being the last remnants of formerly much more numerous species. The gorilla at least seems to have been sociable in olden times, if the apes mentioned in the Periplus really were gorillas. We thus see, even from the above brief review, that life in societies is no exception in the animal world. It is the rule, the law of nature, and it reaches its fullest development with the higher vertebrates. Those species which live solitary or in small families only are relatively few, and their numbers are limited. Nay, it appears very probable that apart from a few exceptions, those birds and mammals which are not gregarious now were living in societies before men multiplied on the earth and waged a permanent war against them, or destroyed the sources from which they formerly derived food. On ne s'associe pas pour mourir was the sound remark of Espinas, and Houzeau, who knew the animal world of some parts of America when it was not yet affected by man, wrote to the same effect. Association is found in the animal world at all degrees of evolution, and according to the grand idea of Herbert Spencer, so brilliantly developed in Perrier's Colony Animale, colonies are at the very origin of evolution in the animal kingdom. But in proportion as we ascend the scale of evolution, we see association growing more and more conscious. It loses its purely physical character. It ceases to be simply instinctive. It becomes reasoned. With the higher vertebrates it is periodical, or is resorted to for the satisfaction of a given want, propagation of a species, migration, hunting, or mutual defense. It even becomes occasional when birds associate against a robber, or mammals combine under the pressure of exceptional circumstances to emigrate. In this last case, it becomes a voluntary deviation from habitual moods of life. The combination sometimes appears in two or more degrees: the family first, then the group, and finally the association of groups habitually scattered but uniting in case of need, as we saw it with the bisons and other ruminants. It also takes higher forms, guaranteeing more independence to the individual without depriving it of the benefits of social life. With most rodents, the individual has its own dwelling, which it can retire to when it prefers being left alone, but the dwellings are laid out in villages and cities so as to guarantee to all inhabitants the benefits and joys of social life. And finally, in several species, such as rats, marmots, hares, etc., sociable life is maintained, notwithstanding the quarrelsome or otherwise egotistic inclinations of the isolated individual. Thus it is not imposed, as is the case with ants and bees, by the very physiological structure of the individuals. It is cultivated for the benefits of mutual aid or for the sake of its pleasures, and this, of course, appears with all possible gradations and with the greatest variety of individual and specific characters. The very variety of aspects taken by